Ever catch yourself absolutely sure about something, only to realize later you were, well, way off?
Happens all the time, right?
Yeah. We like to think we're these really logical beings, carefully weighing every option.
But what if those supposedly rational decisions are often um, steered by hidden quirks in our mental machinery?
What if our brains are taking shortcuts we don't even, know about?
That's the intriguing question at the heart of our discussion today. Welcome to the Deep Dive, where we tackle your submitted sources head-on.
And this time, we're diving deep into excerpts from Daniel Kahneman's groundbreaking book, Thinking Fast and Slow.
Yeah, a really foundational text.
Now, for anyone who hasn't wrestled with this book directly, it basically lays out how our minds operate with two distinct systems.
Right.
You've got system one, the quick gut feeling emotional side that's constantly making these rapid fire judgments.
The automatic pilot.
And then there's system two, the slower, more analytical, effortful system that kicks in when we really need to concentrate.
The one that actually has to think.
Exactly. And our mission today is to really unpack how these two systems influence the way we make sense of things, the decisions we arrive at, and ultimately our understanding of the world.
We're essentially aiming to provide a distilled understanding of these powerful psychological ideas. Maybe a shortcut to grasping some really fundamental aspects of human thought.
And we'll be drawing directly from the insights in these excerpts you sent in from a truly pivotal work in behavioral economics.
Yeah, can't overstate its importance.
Okay, so where do we even begin to get a handle on this stuff? One of the first things that struck me in these excerpts is that understanding our own thinking almost requires learning a new language.
That's the great way to put it. The text introduces this essential vocabulary, starting with the concept of biases.
Right, biases.
And these aren't just random mistakes. They're systematic patterns of error that occur, predictably in our thinking.
So having a name for them is the first step.
Exactly. It helps you recognize them when they pop up.
Like the halo effect, for example. You meet someone who's articulate and, well-dressed, and suddenly you're thinking, they must be competent at their job, even though those initial impressions don't actually guarantee professional skill.
Precisely. And the real value in identifying the halo effect isn't just knowing the term. It's about becoming more attuned to when that initial positive feeling might be, coloring your judgment in other unrelated areas.
It prompts you to ask, am I really evaluating this objectively, or am I just swayed by that first good impression?
Exactly. It forces a bit of that system 2 check.
So once we have these labels, we can start spotting these mental shortcuts in action. The availability heuristic is another one that really jumped out.
Yes, availability.
It sounds a bit academic, but the underlying idea is something we probably all experience, right?
Oh, definitely. The availability heuristic essentially describes our tendency to judge how frequent or probable something is based on how easily examples of it come to mind.
What springs to mind quickly feels more common.
That's it. What's easy to recall often feels more likely, even if it isn't.
And the classic example with the letter K is so simple, but so effective.
Yeah, that one's great.
We tend to think K is a more common first letter because we can easily rattle off words like kite, king, kangaroo.
Right, they just pop into your head.
But actually, K is more often found as the third letter in words. It's just harder to think of examples on the spot.
That perfectly illustrates how our brain's retrieval process can mislead us. The ease doesn't necessarily reflect the actual frequency.
Right.
The author even reflects on his own past assumption about adultery among politicians, realizing his view was likely shaped by intense media coverage.
Making those instances highly available in his memory.
Exactly. Not necessarily reflecting the true base rate compared to other professions.
It makes you wonder how often our perceptions of risk or even, social issues are skewed simply by what gets the most airtime.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You might overestimate the likelihood of some dramatic event just because it's been plastered across the news for weeks.
Yeah.
So the availability heuristic highlights how our perception of reality can be subtly warped by the information environment we inhabit. What's most visible isn't always what's most statistically significant.
No, it's not all doom and gloom about our faulty thinking, right? These excerpts also touch on the power of intuition.
Oh, for sure. System 1 isn't just about errors.
We've all had those moments where we just instinctively know something and it turns out to be correct.
Absolutely. The text recognizes the existence and incredible value of expert intuition. Think about a seasoned ER doctor
Yeah.
who can quickly diagnose a complex condition based on subtle patterns they've seen countless times, or a chess master seeing moves ahead.
And that quote from Herbert Simon really grounded it for me. He said, "Intuition is nothing more and nothing less than recognition built up through years of practice and stored knowledge."
Right, it takes away some of the mystique, doesn't it?
It does.
What's so insightful there is the emphasis on experience. It suggests these flashes aren't magic. They're the result of our brains rapidly accessing and processing vast amounts of stored information.
Information we've built up over time.
Exactly. And as the text points out, even everyday intuitions like instantly reacting to a swerving car are actually quite remarkable feats of unconscious processing that we often just take for granted.
Okay, so System 1 is this rapid, intuitive processor, sometimes right, sometimes prone to bias. Then we have System 2,
The deliberate one.
which is all about focused attention and mental effort. It sounds like the part of our brain that really has to roll up its sleeves and work.
That's a great analogy. System 2 gets engaged when we need to concentrate, exert mental energy, and consciously override those automatic System 1 impulses.
Like trying to remember all the state capitals starting with M.
Exactly. Or following a complicated recipe when you're used to just winging it. Or driving on the wrong side of the road if you're visiting the UK.
Huh, yeah, that takes effort. And apparently, this mental effort even has physical signs. They mention pupil dilation and an increased heart rate.
It is fascinating. The excerpts describe experiments where researchers could literally watch participants' pupils widen as they tackled a hard mental problem.
Wow.
And what's even more revealing, the pupils would immediately constrict when the person either solved it or simply gave up.
Like a physical sign of mental exertion or giving up.
It's almost like our eyes betray the intensity of our focus. It's a tangible link.
That's such a concrete image of our brain at work. And this ties into the idea that our attention is a finite resource, right? We
Yeah.
can't be in that state of intense focus all the time.
Precisely. The text introduces mental blindness, or inattentional blindness, famously shown by the invisible gorilla experiment.
Oh, yeah, the gorilla. People counting basketball passes completely miss it.
Right, because they're so focused on the counting task. System 2 is occupied.
And they also mentioned participants missing the letter K during a demanding digit task, even when looking right at it.
It really underscores how selective our attention can be. When System 2 is heavily engaged, it tunes out other stuff, even obvious stuff.
It's a powerful illustration of the limits of our conscious attention.
Definitely.
So System 2 is effortful, it demands our attention, but what specific things can it do that the quick-thinking System 1 just can't manage? What are its unique strengths?
Well, System 2 is crucial for tasks that require following explicit rules, comparing multiple options across different criteria, making deliberate, reasoned choices,
Logical stuff.
and understanding and working with statistical information. System 1 is great at simple patterns, immediate threats, but it struggles with complexity and abstract reasoning.
They use the example of the stereotypical librarian, someone meek and tidy with a need for order. System 1 might instantly jump to that label.
Exactly. That's System 1's rapid association at play. Just clicks into place. But then to consider the actual base rate, how many librarians are there actually in the population? And weigh that against the stereotype. That requires the more deliberate analytical processing of System 2.
Right, you have to stop and think about the numbers.
You do.
And they also discuss task sets, our ability to consciously program our memory to follow specific instructions, like meticulously counting the instances of the letter F on a page.
Yeah, that takes real concentration.
That definitely requires sustained mental effort.
That's a key function of System 2, that executive control. The ability to override automatic responses and consciously direct our mental processes according to a specific goal. Essential for anything that doesn't come naturally or breaks habit.
It sounds mentally taxing. No wonder we often default to System 1 whenever we can.
Absolutely.
Which brings us to this idea of the law of least effort.
Yeah.
That really resonates. My brain definitely prefers the path of least resistance.
Most brains do. The excerpts explain that our minds are basically wired to avoid unnecessary mental strain. Tasks like the add 3 exercise.
Where you keep adding 3 to a sequence of numbers.
Yeah, or even just holding a short string of digits in your mind. They're surprisingly demanding compared to our usual, more automatic mental activities. We naturally look for cognitive shortcuts to conserve energy.
So our brains are constantly trying to optimize for efficiency, even if it means sacrificing some accuracy sometimes.
Pretty much.
And this leads to the concept of ego depletion. That sounds a bit dramatic, like our willpower actually gets used up.
It does sound dramatic, but the research by Roy Baumeister and others suggests something like that all forms of self-control, resisting temptation, focusing on a tough task, managing emotions, seem to draw from a shared, limited pool of mental energy.
So exerting willpower in one area can temporarily reduce your capacity for self-control in another.
That's the idea.
Like if you've had a really mentally draining morning at work, you might find it harder to resist that afternoon cookie.
That's a classic example. The text mentions things like suppressing emotional responses, leading to decreased physical stamina, or resisting tempting foods, resulting in poorer performance on subsequent cognitive tests.
A finite reservoir of mental resources? Makes sense.
Yeah, it suggests we can actually get mentally tired in a way that affects our choices.
This makes me think about the difference between people who really dig into problems and those who are happy with the first plausible answer. The excerpts touch on this too, right? Calling it intellectual sloth.
Oof, yeah. Pretty blunt term.
It is.
They do contrast this tendency to accept superficially appealing answers that come easily to mind with engaged thinkers.
Engaged thinkers.
Yeah, people who are more alert, intellectually active, skeptical of their initial intuitions, and willing to invest the effort to critically examine their own thinking. Psychologist Keith Stanovich calls them more rational.
And they mentioned Shane Frederick's cognitive reflection test. Those tricky questions designed to trip up System 1.
Exactly, the ones with the bat and ball or the lily pads.
I remember feeling totally tricked by some of those.
Many people do. They're specifically designed to show the difference between relying on that quick, intuitive response and engaging System 2 for more careful consideration.
And lower scores correlate with impulsivity.
Yeah, the excerpts point out that individuals who score lower tend to exhibit more impulsive behavior, greater impatience, and a preference for immediate gratification. They're less willing to put in the mental work.
Okay, so we have these two systems constantly interacting. One of the fundamental ways System 1 operates is through association. It sounds like our brain is this intricate web of connected ideas.
That's a perfect way to visualize it. Associative activation is the process where one thought or idea automatically triggers a whole network of related thoughts, feelings, memories.
Like dominoes falling.
Kind of, yeah. Creating a sense of coherence. For instance, the word beach might instantly activate sun, sand, ocean, and maybe feelings of relaxation.
And a lot of this happens beneath the surface without us even being consciously aware these connections are being made. That's kind of wild.
It is. The text emphasizes that a significant portion of our associative thinking operates silently, outside our conscious awareness. We have limited insight into that complex web shaping our initial reactions and intuitions.
This leads to the fascinating marvels of priming. I've heard about studies where subtle cues can influence people's behavior without them realizing it.
Exactly. Priming effects demonstrate how exposure to a particular word, image, or idea can temporarily influence the ease with which related concepts come to mind.
And even affect what we do next.
Yeah. A classic example is subtly exposing people to words associated with old age, like Florida, wrinkle, bingo, and then observing them walking slightly slower afterwards, without any conscious awareness of the link.
Wow. It's like our brains are constantly being subtly nudged and guided by these unconscious associations.
Seems that way.
Now, the excerpts also introduce this concept of the dial of cognitive ease. What exactly is that?
Think of it like a mental meter, ranging from easy to strained. Cognitive ease signals things are going smoothly, information feels familiar, no major effort needed.
Business as usual for the brain.
Right. Cognitive strain, on the other hand, indicates we're facing something novel, complex, maybe problematic. It's a signal to engage System 2 more heavily.
So, feeling cognitively easy is usually a good sign, like things are okay.
In many situations, yes. But here's the catch the text highlights. This subjective feeling of cognitive ease is also linked to a greater tendency to believe what we hear or read.
Oh, interesting. So, ease makes us more credulous.
In a way, yes. When things feel easy and familiar, we're less likely to be critical.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Because this feeling of cognitive ease can lead to illusions of remembering and even the feeling that something is true. How does that work?
Well, the text explains that just like our vision can be fooled by optical illusions, our memory is also fallible. It can create illusions too.
Okay.
They use Larry Jacoby's becoming famous overnight experiment. By repeatedly showing people made-up names, they found that later on participants would misattribute the familiarity of those names, just the feeling of having seen them before, to actual fame.
So just because a name sounds familiar Even if you can't recall where you heard it, your brain might jump to, oh, that must be someone famous.
Precisely. That feeling of familiarity, that cognitive ease, spills over into our judgments of truth.
How so?
Statements that are easy to process, maybe because they're written clearly, or maybe because we've encountered them before, feel more true,
Even if they're not.
even if there's no factual basis for them. Repetition is a powerful tool for this. Advertisers know this, propagandists know this. Repeating something makes it feel more familiar and therefore more true.
It's a bit unsettling how easily our sense of what's true can be influenced simply by making something feel familiar or easy to process.
It is. The text even points out you don't need to repeat the whole statement. Just repeating a part of it can create that sense of familiarity and increase the odds of it being accepted as true.
Wow. Okay, now, our mood also seems to have a significant impact on how we think. The excerpts discuss a cluster of positive mood, intuition, creativity, and even increased gullibility. That's an intriguing mix.
It is, isn't it? A positive mood seems to relax the critical oversight of System 2.
What's System 1 run more freely?
Yeah, making us more reliant on faster, more intuitive thinking. This can boost creativity, broaden associations, but also makes us less vigilant, more susceptible to errors, maybe more gullible.
And a negative mood does the opposite.
Generally, yes. A negative mood often signals something might be wrong, prompting a more cautious, analytical approach. System 2 gets more involved.
So, when you're feeling happy and relaxed, you might be more open to new ideas, but perhaps also less likely to spot potential flaws or inconsistencies.
That seems to be the trade-off. Good mood says, environment safe, explore. Bad mood says, potential threat, analyze.
Interesting. The excerpts then delve into norm theory and how we perceive causality. This sounds like it's about how we establish what's normal and how we attribute causes to events.
Exactly. Norm theory suggests our perception of what's normal is heavily influenced by expectations, and a single unexpected event can reshape those expectations.
Like the restaurant soup example.
Right. A diner winces after tasting the soup. Suddenly, if another diner startles or winces later, it seems less surprising, more normal, because our baseline expectation has shifted.
The first unexpected event creates a new frame of reference.
Precisely. And then there's our almost automatic tendency to seek out causes for everything, even when things might just be random.
We need an explanation.
It's a powerful drive of System 1. The text references Michat's work on physical causality. We just see one billiard ball causing another to move, and Hyder in Simmel's animation with moving shapes.
Where people see triangles chasing circles.
Yeah. We readily attribute intentions, emotions, and causal stories even to simple geometric shapes. We're wired to look for agents and narratives.
Which leads us to this rather stark description of the gullible System 1 and the lazy System 2. That paints a pretty clear picture of where errors might creep in.
It does. Daniel Gilbert's theory proposes that our initial reaction, the System 1 reaction, is to believe a statement.
Believing is easy, automatic.
That's the idea. And actively disbelieving requires the effortful engagement of System 2.
So doubt takes work.
Essentially, yes. The experiment where they presented nonsensical assertions labeled true or false showed that when System 2 was busy with another task,
Like holding numbers in memory.
right, people were more likely to end up believing statements that were actually labeled false. Their System 2 didn't have the resources to unbelieve them.
So when we're mentally fatigued or distracted, we become more susceptible to believing things without properly scrutinizing them. That certainly resonates.
It does, and it suggests why persuasive messages might land better when our cognitive defenses are down.
Now, one of the most impactful acronyms from these excerpts is WYSIATI, what you see is all there is. That seems absolutely key.
Oh, it's fundamental to understanding intuitive thinking. WYSIATI underscores that System 1 rapidly forms judgments based only on the information that is readily available.
It doesn't account for missing information.
Not really. It doesn't naturally consider alternative possibilities or the quality or quantity of the data. It just works with what's there.
They give that simple example. Will Mindic be a good leader? She is intelligent and strong. Our gut reaction is likely, yes.
Exactly. Based on just those two positive traits. System 1 jumps to a conclusion without stopping to ask, wait, what else do I need to know? Is she corrupt? Is she cruel?
Right.
The text also describes that experiment with the legal scenario where people form strong opinions based on only one side of the evidence, even when told it was incomplete.
It's like our brains construct a coherent narrative from whatever fragments are available, even if that narrative is based on a very incomplete picture.
That's the essence of WYSIATI. System 1 works with what it has or can easily retrieve, and doesn't inherently seek out what it doesn't know.
So System 1 is constantly making these quick, effortless assessments, basic assessments, the excerpts call them.
Yes. Continuously monitoring our environment, internal and external, generating these fundamental evaluations like similarity, causality, availability, without conscious effort.
And these basic assessments then influence our intuitive judgments.
Heavily. They often get substituted for more complex questions we might not have the immediate capacity to answer.
Like judging competence based on facial features, a strong jawline or a confident smile.
Exactly. It's unsettling, but those superficial cues can sway our perceptions, even if there's zero actual correlation with competence.
So that's an example of substitution.
It is. We replace the hard question, how competent is this person, with an easier one. How trustworthy or dominant does their face seem? It's a System 1 shortcut.
And this substitution, answering an easier question when faced with a harder one, seems like a core operating principle.
Absolutely. It's a frequent maneuver for System 1 when confronted with a challenging judgment.
Then there's the affect heuristic, where our emotions, our likes and dislikes, powerfully shape our judgments.
Yeah, Paul Slubik's affect heuristic. If we have a positive feeling about something, we tend to downplay its risks and highlight its benefits.
And the reverse if we dislike it.
Exactly. Our emotional responses aren't just add-ons. They're deeply intertwined with our evaluations. The text notes how even asking about your dating life before asking about your overall happiness can skew the happiness rating.
Because your current emotional state looms large. WYSIATI again.
Precisely. Your current state of mind heavily influences the broader assessment.
Okay, we've explored a lot about System 1's quirks. Now the excerpts transition to Part 2 and delve into the belief in the law of small numbers. Sounds statistical and maybe tricky for intuition.
You're right. The text opens with that anecdote about low kidney cancer rates in certain rural counties.
Right, the ones that are sparsely populated, traditional, mostly Republican.
And the tempting intuitive leap is to find a cause, like clean living or something related to the lifestyle.
But that might just be randomness.
It might well illustrate the law of small numbers at play, or rather, our mistaken belief in it.
Which is the idea that small samples should perfectly mirror the larger population.
Precisely. Our intuition expects even small groups to be representative. But statistically, small samples are way more susceptible to random fluctuations and extreme outcomes, both high and low cancer rates in that example.
So the real reason for the low rates might just be the small population size itself.
Exactly. Fewer people means random chance has a bigger impact, leading to more extreme results than you'd find in large populations. The author's first paper was actually called Belief in the Law of Small Numbers.
And they warned against trusting statistical intuitions.
Strongly. They recommended relying on computation, not gut feelings, when dealing with statistics.
So spotting a pattern in a small set of data doesn't automatically mean there's a real underlying cause.
No, it could just be chance. Our associative machinery loves causes, but statistics demands thinking about randomness.
This makes me think of the hot hand fallacy in basketball.
Perfect example.
The belief that a player who's made a few shots is hot and more likely to make the next one.
Right, but statistical analysis often shows it's just random variation clustering together, looking like a streak. We see patterns everywhere, even in randomness.
And this affects how we judge investment advisors, business decisions.
All sorts of things. We're too quick to attribute random outcomes to skill or systematic factors.
No, the anchoring effect is another bias. I know this involves how a number, even a random one, can pull our estimates.
That's right. When we consider a specific value the anchor before estimating an unknown quantity, our estimate tends to get stuck near that anchor.
Even if the anchor is totally irrelevant.
Yep. Like the example asking if Gandhi was older or younger than, say, 144 years old before guessing his actual age. That crazy high number pulls people's estimates way up.
It's wild. And it's not just silly anchors, right? Like a house's asking price.
Exactly. That initial price heavily influences your perception of its value, even if you try to be objective. Any number you're asked to consider can act as an anchor.
And how does this work? Is it suggestion? WYSIATI again?
The text suggests is partly like suggestion. System 1 instinctively tries to construct a world where the anchor makes sense. It selectively activates associations consistent with that anchor number.
So it builds a temporary reality around the anchor.
Kind of. It's another manifestation of that associative coherence in WYSIATI, the brain, working with what's been made salient.
Okay, shifting gears slightly. Availability bias revisited, but specifically for risk perception.
Right. How easily examples of a danger come to mind influences how risky we think it is.
So the Slovic, Lichtenstein, and Fischoff research showed our perceived risks often don't match actual statistics.
Exactly. Because vivid, easily recalled events, often amplified by media, get overestimated. Think plane crashes versus asthma deaths.
Right, plane crashes are dramatic, highly reported.
So they feel more frequent than statistically more common, but less dramatic causes of death, like asthma or diabetes. Stroke versus accidents is another example where perceptions are often skewed.
And this leads to availability cascades.
Yeah, where a relatively minor event, if it gets enough media buzz, can trigger widespread fear and even influence public policy, sometimes disproportionately to the actual risk.
Though maybe sometimes they raise awareness too.
It's a complex issue. The cascades can be irrational, but they might sometimes have long-term benefits in highlighting real, if previously overlooked, risks.
Let's circle back to representativeness with the Tom W. example. Judging likelihood based on stereotypes.
Yes, people get a personality sketch of Tom W. and rank the probability of him being in various graduate fields.
And they rank based on how well he fits the stereotype of each field.
Overwhelmingly, yes. They ignore the base rates, the actual proportion of students in each discipline.
So even if humanities has way more students than library science, if Tom W. sounds like a stereotypical librarian,
People rate library science as more probable for him. They go with a representative description over the statistical reality.
and when this happens, it's both System 1 offering the stereotype match.
And System 2, failing to check or apply the base rates, either through ignorance or laziness.
The famous Linda the bank teller problem is another powerful illustration.
Ah yes, Linda. Described as outspoken, concerned with social justice,
And people say it's more probable she's a feminist bank teller than just a bank teller.
which is logically impossible, right? The subset can't be more probable than the larger set.
But the description is so representative of a feminist stereotype.
But it powerfully overrides logic for many people. It's
Yeah.
a classic conjunction fallacy driven by representativeness.
And people really resist seeing the logical flaw.
Often, yes.
Yeah.
The intuitive appeal of the stereotype match is incredibly strong.
Okay, let's tackle regression to the mean. Another statistical idea that feels counterintuitive.
It really does. The flight instructor anecdote is perfect.
He thought praising great performance made pilots do worse next time, and criticizing bad performance made them do better.
Yeah, he concluded praise was bad, criticism good.
But it was just regression.
Exactly. An exceptionally good performance is likely to be followed by a more average one, and an exceptionally bad one is also likely to be followed by one closer to average, purely due to random fluctuations around their typical skill level.
Regardless of the praise or criticism.
Right. The instructor was mistaking a statistical artifact for a causal effect of his feedback.
So sometimes things just naturally even out, no specific cause needed.
Precisely. Regression doesn't have a causal explanation. It's just what happens when outcomes aren't perfectly correlated with underlying skill or whatever.
And the less perfect the correlation, the more regression you expect.
Exactly. If the correlation coefficient between two things isn't 1 or -1, you'll see regression to the mean.
This has big implications for making predictions, right? Taming intuitive predictions.
Yes, intuitive predictions, driven by WYSIATI and representativeness, tend to ignore regression. They're too extreme.
Like the example of Julie, who read fluently at age 4. We intuitively predict a super high college GPA.
Right. System 1 constructs the best story. Early reader, brilliant student, evaluates the evidence, strong, substitutes intensity, very impressive reading, and translates that to the GPA scale, probably predicting something like a 4.0.
But that ignores regression.
Totally. It's non-regressive and likely biased upwards. To make a better prediction, you need to tame that intuition.
How?
Start with a baseline prediction like the average GPA at that college, then evaluate the quality of your evidence connecting early reading to college GPA. Is it a perfect correlation? No way.
So you adjust your prediction.
Yes, you adjust from the baseline based on the evidence, but crucially, you moderate that adjustment towards the mean to account for the imperfect correlation. Your prediction should be less extreme than your intuition suggests.
So maybe predict a good GPA for Julie, but not necessarily the absolute top.
Exactly. It's statistically more sound, though maybe less satisfying than nailing a rare extreme prediction.
Moving on, the illusion of understanding or hindsight bias, that I knew it all along feeling.
Ah, yes. Once something happens, it seems so much more obvious and predictable than it actually was beforehand.
Fishoff's study before Nixon's China visit showed this clearly.
Absolutely. After the visit, people remember themselves as having assigned much higher probabilities to the things that actually occurred than they really had beforehand. Hindsight makes the past look neat and tidy.
And this is pernicious when evaluating decisions, right? The outcome bias.
Very much so. We tend to judge the quality of a decision based on whether the outcome was good or bad.
Instead of judging it based on whether the decision was reasonable given the information available at the time.
Exactly. A good decision process can still lead to a bad outcome due to luck, and a bad process might luckily result in a good outcome. Hindsight bias makes it hard to see that clearly.
Then there's the illusion of validity, being overconfident in our predictions, even when things are highly unpredictable.
Yes. Even in areas like CEO success or stock market performance, where luck plays a huge role, we tend to think we understand the causal links much better than we do. We feel our judgments are more valid than they are.
The text mentions studies showing even excellent companies regress towards average performance over time.
Right. Sustained excellence is rare, partly due to regression, but we hold on to the belief that we can identify lasting winners.
And the authors admit their own illusion of validity when trying to predict research success.
Yeah, a very honest admission. They felt confident in their judgments, but later realized their predictions were barely better than ants. The feeling of validity didn't match the reality of their accuracy.
That disconnect is key. It explains why investors keep thinking they can beat the market.
Despite decades of evidence suggesting otherwise for most people, the illusion of skill and validity is powerful.
This overconfidence leads to ignoring uncertainty, especially when explaining the past, like pundits do.
The ease of explaining the past makes the future seem less uncertain than it is. Nassim Taleb's Black Swan hammers this home. Hindsight creates an illusion of predictability.
Which makes us unprepared for truly unexpected events.
Exactly. We think we understand the world's machinery better than we do.
The excerpts then introduce a crucial distinction: the inside view versus the outside view, especially regarding the planning fallacy.
Right. The planning fallacy is our chronic tendency to underestimate how long tasks will take, how much they'll cost, and the risks involved. We're overly optimistic planners.
The inside view is focusing just on our specific project.
Yes, focusing on the unique details, our plans, our abilities, imagining a smooth path forward.
While the outside view
Takes a broader perspective.
No.
It asks, what happened when other people tried similar projects? It looks at the statistics, the base rates of delays, cost overruns, failures in comparable situations.
That anecdote about the textbook writing project taking years longer than expected.
Classic planning fallacy. They took the inside view, focused on their own team and plan, and ignored relevant statistical evidence about similar projects that was right under their noses.
We always think our project will be different, better than average.
That's the optimistic bias fueling the inside view. Ben Flapjerg's work emphasizes using the outside view reference class forecasting to get more realistic predictions.
So counteract that natural optimism.
Temper it with historical data, yes. We tend to view the world, our attributes, and our goals through rose-tinted glasses.
Okay, now shifting to decision-making under risk. Bernoulli's error and the limits of his utility theory.
Bernoulli's idea was groundbreaking, focusing on the utility of wealth, not just the amount, and diminishing marginal utility. Richer people care less about an extra dollar.
But it had flaws.
Big ones. It didn't account for the reference point. People don't evaluate outcomes in terms of absolute wealth, but as gains and losses relative to their current situation.
The starting point matters.
Hugely. And it didn't capture the fact that losses loom larger psychologically than equivalent gains.
Which leads directly to loss aversion. The pain of losing is stronger than the pleasure of gaining.
Much stronger. Typically about twice as strong according to research. Losing $100 hurts more than gaining $100 feels good.
The hedonic twins example shows this preference for the status quo.
Right. And the Muggs study demonstrated the endowment effect. We value things we own more highly just because we own them. Asking price is higher than offering price.
Because selling feels like a loss.
Exactly. Loss aversion explains a lot, from consumer behavior to investor caution. Even golfers trying harder to avoid a bogey a loss relative to par, than to make a birdie again.
Par becomes the crucial reference point,
Yep.
and then framing affects how presenting the same choice differently changes the decision.
Huge effect. The surgery example is classic. Framing it as 90% survival rate sounds much fitter and gets more takers than framing it as 10% mortality rate.
Even though it's the exact same outcome statistically.
Right. We're surprisingly passive about frames. We tend to accept the frame given to us, rather than actively reframing the problem to see if our preference changes. System 1 likes the easy path.
Now, the distinction between the two selves, the experiencing self and the remembering self, that's really fascinating.
It is. The experiencing self lives in the moment, moment by moment. The remembering self looks back and evaluates the experience as a whole.
And they don't always agree.
Often they don't. The cold hand experiments show this dramatically. People preferred a longer trial with more total pain, just because it ended slightly less painfully.
Why?
Because the remembering self, the one making the choice for the future, relies heavily on the peak end rule, the average of the most intense moment and the final moment. It neglects the duration.
So the memory is dominated by the peak and the end, not the total amount of pain.
Exactly. Duration neglect. And this applies to life evaluations too, not just short experiments. How we remember vacations or even our lives is shaped by peaks and ends, not the sum total of moment-to-moment experiences.
So we might make choices that create better memories, even if they involve less pleasant experiences overall.
It seems so. We cater to the remembering self.
Finally, the focusing illusion, exaggerating the importance of whatever we're thinking about right now.
Yes. When you think about a specific aspect of life, say climate or income, you tend to overestimate its impact on overall well-being.
Like the study asking people if Californians are happier than Midwesterners.
Right. Everyone, including Midwesterners, tended to focus on climate and assume Californians must be happier, exaggerating the actual difference in reported life satisfaction.
We focus on the difference and forget all the other things that matter equally, or more.
Exactly. The text highlights this difference between factors affecting experience well-being moment to moment, like health, commuting, socializing, and factors affecting life satisfaction judgments, like goals, comparisons, income.
So understanding these two systems, System 1 and System 2, and all these biases, it's really valuable for navigating our own minds.
Incredibly valuable. They're conceptual tools, of course, not literal brain regions, but they provide a powerful framework for understanding the interplay between automatic and effortful thinking.
And becoming aware is the first step.
It's the crucial first step towards maybe catching some of those errors, engaging System 2 when needed, and making more rational, less biased judgments and decisions.
Well, this deep dive into the excerpts from Thinking Fast and Slow has been truly illuminating. It's astonishing to realize the extent to which these two systems shape our every thought and action.
Yeah, often in ways we're completely unaware of. We've covered a lot of ground: halo effect, availability, WYSIATI, anchoring, loss aversion.
Representativeness, regression, planning a fallacy, framing.
All stemming from that fundamental interaction between fast, intuitive System 1 and slow, effortful System 2.
So as you, our listener, go about your day, maybe take a moment to reflect on a recent decision you made. Which system do you suspect was primarily in control?
Yeah, and can you spot any of the biases we talked about potentially playing a role? How might this awareness influence your thinking going forward?
That's the key takeaway, isn't it? Not eliminating intuition, but knowing when to trust it and when to maybe double check with System 2.
Exactly. Cultivating that awareness, knowing when to engage that more effortful thinking.
Thank you for sharing your insightful sources and for joining us on this deep dive into the fascinating world of cognitive psychology.
Always a pleasure. Till next time.